Welcome back to our Fair Chance interview series where we speak to leaders and experts in the fair chance hiring space. I'm Alex Love. I'm a partner at LevelSet and CEO of Alex Love Consulting.
And I'm Matt Joyce, a partner at LevelSet as well, and a partner at Envoy Advisory.
Awesome. And so we've been fortunate enough to work with the Center for Community Transitions for a number of years, and thought that it was so important for us to really highlight community partners in our second episode, and also have the opportunity to introduce another member of our LevelSet team, Solomon.
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Solomon Moreno Rosa. As Alex mentioned, I too am with the LevelSet team, and much of my work really centers around building strong community partnerships with employers and really being proactive around developing strong recruitment pipelines around talent.
Great, thank you. And the star of our show today, Patrice, please, I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so thank you for having me, first of all. This is going to be fun. I am Patrice Funderburg. I'm the executive director at the Center for Community Transitions. We are a Charlotte-based nonprofit that has been in operation for 47 years. And I come to the agency after a 25-year plus career in corporate human resources. And so I work at the intersection of that work in my previous life and criminal justice advocacy around employment, educational outcomes, and reentry pathways for currently incarcerated women here at the agency.
Great. Well, Patrice, we are so fortunate to have you as a guest and as a leader in this field. We wanted to start just hearing more about CCT's work. We've had a chance to work together in Charlotte. We know you and your organization as leaders in the field, as really thoughtful collaborators with employers on fair chance hiring. But tell us more about your programming and how you operate.
Yeah, so the CCT model includes 3 programs that focus on workforce development, child development, economic supports, health and well-being, and social capital. We ground ourselves in the Ascend 2-generation model for family reunification, which comes out of the Aspen Institute. So we sort of work at the intersection of all of those areas. Our flagship program, which is called LifeWorks, provides employment and career readiness training, personal branding, and individual client advisement to justice-involved individuals. Our second programmatic offering is called Families Doing Time, and that program works to improve social and emotional skills as well as academic achievement outcomes for children who have an incarcerated parent, while also increasing the family resilience of the entire family as a part of the family reunification piece. And then lastly, I'm a prison warden. Go figure. So the Center for Women is a residential work release facility that provides holistic transition supports to 30 currently incarcerated women in the state system who are nearing the end of their prison sentence. And so they live with us for about 1 to 3 years, and we provide that holistic reentry support and transition services. I say prison warden just jokingly because I live at the paradox of abolition and incarceration and creating those pathways as a way to reimagine justice through our community-based programming.
And Patrice, in addition to all of those hats that you wear, you mentioned your background as an HR professional. I think you bring a unique set of skills to this work by understanding corporate HR, understanding what employers are looking for as they're considering candidates, and particularly considering candidates with past convictions. I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit more about how CCT partners with employers directly. What are some examples of sort of partnerships that you've built with employers that have enabled people coming through the CCT program to get jobs, to succeed in jobs? And I'm going to pass that same question to Solomon, who's done this work around the country as well. But Patrice, I want to start with you.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because some of it is emergent, and some of it is rooted in sort of the historical nature of the way CCT did things. And I'll talk about both. So historically, CCT established partnerships with employers largely through word of mouth and through the local reentry council, which is sort of this sort of county-based collaborative on reentry services. It's not uncommon for industries like manufacturing, warehouse and distribution, and food services to hire people with criminal backgrounds. And so we limited ourselves in many ways to sort of those vocational areas. Since joining the agency as the operational leader just last year in January of 2020, we're expanding that focus and partnering with organizations that have national footprint as well as statewide footprint to advance fair chance hiring practices that are rooted in recently passed legislation. That includes more corporate engagement, which starts from a very different set of questions that sort of put me in the space of, I call it the playground of asking the HR questions, like grounded in reentry and second chances. And so probably our best example is work that predates me, but I reap the benefit, and that's with Bojangles, which is a Southern fast food chain that many of you all are familiar with and help lead that work, but serving as the reentry partner to a corporation that actually raised their hand. So the first thing is that buy-in and that corporate engagement on the front end, and then really allowing that partnership to evolve through looking at current processes and systems within Bojangles that would potentially filter out justice-involved folks, and then being willing to sort of explore and address the issues that potentially would come up. And we've had a lot of success in that model, so much so that Bojangles has now expanded that across its entire footprint. A more recent collaboration that is still sort of generative is a large financial services organization partnered with us to provide education from legislative to activation, and are beginning to look not only in their HR processes, but in their government relations department to look at how does second chance advocacy from a government relations support standpoint inform the development of the overall sort of full life cycle processes. And so I like to use both of those examples because one is really rooted in somewhat of our traditional approaches, and the second one is very strategic and holistic within the corporate environment, which is something that traditionally has not happened in the reentry space.
I'm going to jump in here, mostly because I geek out on everything that you're talking about, Patrice. You know, I really see CCT as such a model for how community organizations can really be an asset for employers.
Yeah.
You know, I love this question about what makes good partnerships between community organizations and employers, because it's certainly one that we at Level Set grapple with often, particularly when working with various different companies. You know, part of our work entails diving deep into new markets to really better understand the local ecosystem of reentry and workforce organizations, to really develop a kind of a roadmap that outlines the various kinds of services and support systems that exist for vulnerable communities, particularly those with justice involvement. You know, once we really understand what that kind of full constellation of justice programs and service providers looks like, that's really when we can then start to answer that question around partnership development and fit. And we do so by using a kind of a criteria that we've developed to help understand the kinds of strengths and assets that community organizations bring to the table. So, right, you know, when assessing organizations, we certainly look at, right, the important kind of nonprofit metrics around operations and program outputs and outcomes for individuals and the kind of leadership and staff that these organizations have. But I'd say in addition to that, we really try to be purposeful around looking at the other kinds of qualifications that make for really critical aspects of successful partnership. So, right, we dig into, whether an organization is working at the scale needed by an employer or by a company. Right? Do they have a kind of a dedicated work readiness program that supports the training of individuals? Do they have the right set of wraparound supports that can really ensure the long-term success of individuals on the job? Right? Because, there are so many great organizations out there doing, really tremendous work, but selecting the right partner for organization, the right partner for employers, is certainly really key. And that's ultimately what will ensure success of these initiatives.
Right.
So I'd love to turn that back around and, Patrice, ask you just on the question of measuring success. How is it that you and the CCT team evaluate success and determine whether or not partnerships are effective?
Yeah, so I too geek out on this because I've been out of HR for about 5 years, but still sort of geek out on like this end-to-end employee life cycle and all the things that we know happen and how vastly different it is in the nonprofit space. So again, sort of what was and where we're headed, we measure success of employer partnerships really based on the number of people hired, their advancement, talent mobility within the organization, and then unique to the reentry space, incremental recidivism outcomes, right? I have yet to meet a company that is interested in that statistic, right, relative to what their business outcomes are. But maybe that is important, going forward. I'd like to get us to the point of also tracking talent mobility across the partnerships, which I believe Bojangles is starting to do now as well, so that we can more clearly articulate the long-term impact of these recidivism outcomes. I think what I come into the nonprofit space remembering is that in corporate environments, there are hard results metrics that are typically tied to profit margins, right? Profit outcomes for the business. And in the nonprofit space, sometimes you can't measure social impact. In addition to many nonprofit organizations are tracking their measurements based on the grant requirements, right, for particular outcomes. And it's incongruent with, if I'm in my HR position at a corporate employer, social impact metrics are not going to align with my overall business measures. And I think that's a really interesting and fertile ground for a different kind of conversation in the ways that companies are beginning to look at second chance employment. The legislative piece is another one, how companies decide to evaluate their government relations can now include that sort of legislative impact or advocacy impact if they include second chance or fair chance hiring as a subset of what the government relations team is. And that's never before happened. And thanks to our event, short plug, on our event last month, we are now starting to foster those conversations. From an HR standpoint, I feel like what the nonprofit sector in terms of thinking about metrics differently is to lead with the data, like the lead with informed industry data, but then guide with metrics that are specific and unique to the HR outcomes of that particular organization. And that's situational, right? Organizations in particular industries are measuring different things. And it isn't always the case that nonprofit partners understand that, number one. And number two, can really foster and lead and guide a conversation across the full employee spectrum, as opposed to, we can help you place 20 people in jobs, period. Right. And so I think there's a lot of expansion that can happen and spaciousness that can happen in those conversations. And that's sort of where the space that we are as a part of our strategic focus on, moving somewhat into sort of community nonprofit partnership, but really with a consultative lens, together with partners like what we did with Bojangles, but then that adds to the ecosystem of the real holistic approach, the holistic business approach that informs the overall impact and social impact of the outcomes that we're seeking.
Definitely. And thinking more about, how there are a variety of community partners that are using different metrics and, employers all have their own individual culture and context. What kind of advice do you have for employers that are kind of starting on this fair chance path?
Yeah, so I think about my days in like the old school diversity, and then it was diversity and inclusion, and then we fit in equity. And it always starts with engaging senior leaders and get the company buy-in first, right? I'm a big proponent of language matters, like in all the ways. And now with, racial equity and justice involvement and criminal justice reform and all the different language that's out there, statements that are being written about what companies are going to do with absolutely no knowledge or understanding on how they're actually going to do it, really forces and creates an opportunity really for nonprofit organizations to encourage senior leaders within organizations as a part of relationship building to get that buy-in, right? And so, for example, I had a senior leader at a major company here offer some just general feedback that what is the community savings and how do you calculate that? And there are many reentry organizations that have no idea how to calculate that and haven't even thought about that because that's not a grant requirement. So engaging senior leaders in understanding, one, how they need to hear it so that the buy-in is there. So that's that sort of compelling business case. And then do research before jumping into the momentum of second chance employment and reentry. There's way more than most will know or understand. And it's those blind spots, right, that can have an adverse impact on the way people are trying to bring justice involved folks on board, right? In this work, I found that the strategic collaborations that are focused on longer term, multi-year collective impact versus traditional approaches that create forced competition of nonprofits that are doing similar work. And this jeopardizes the potential for true collective impact outcomes. And when you couple that with a limited to no understanding of truly what is involved in the employee lifecycle process of bringing justice involved folks into the organization, we're back to ban the bots. Right? We don't know why they didn't last in the company, right? But we never thought about, putting some stop gaps in terms of criminal background checks and what's available out in the marketplace for anyone and everyone to see if someone has justice involvement or limitations that that person may have as a condition of probation or parole that, affect their work schedule or their, potential for development, and maybe they've had a gap because of their period of incarceration that requires some preliminary professional development before they can really go into a structured development program. And we're not thinking about those for this particular population. And so, my advice would be to kind of step outside of all the wonderful ways that HR can over-engineer a thing or companies can over-engineer a thing, and just take a step back and see and partner with nonprofit agencies and others that are doing this work on not creating something new, but integrating the unique needs of a particular vulnerable population into existing processes so that there's equity, right? Because we are on the other side, we also don't want to single out the justice involved person in the organization in any way, from sourcing and onboarding to talent and mobility and development to that engagement and retention and real growth within the organization. So starting with the buy-in to really digging into those individual processes and layering that in a way that is inclusive is what I would say.
Those are such great considerations to take into account, and a really awesome note to conclude us on. So as we wrap up here, I just want to take a second and say thank you, Patrice, for taking the time to chat with us today. I mean this truly when the work that you're doing is transformational, not just for the participants that you're serving, but also in terms of just how these engagements are really pushing the field to implement greater initiatives centered around fair chance hiring. So just wanted to say thank you again, Patrice, for this really rich conversation. And we are extremely excited to continue to follow all the awesome work that CCT will continue to lead. So really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love talking about this stuff too. So I'm excited about where this work will take us, because you're right, it truly is transformative, and I'm happy to be a part of it.